perhaps the most brilliant writer ever to set pen to paper, James Baldwin, not only in this country but any country, said a lot of things about race that you ought to know, but one thing in particular I think especially relevant for this evening and for really all the work that I do. He said this, and he said it in 1965 in Ebony magazine, in a special issue of Ebony that was actually talking about the white problem in America, right? Because as I may mention, we normally think of race as a black and brown problem, but Ebony that year flipped the script on that normal narrative and said, no, actually, we're going to examine whiteness and the problem of whiteness. And they had Baldwin write an essay. And in his essay, he said, among other things, the following. He said, people who imagine that history flatters them, as it does, indeed, since they wrote it, are impaled on their history like a butterfly on a pin and become incapable of seeing or changing themselves or the world. This is where it seems to me the vast majority of white Americans find themselves impaled. They are dimly or vividly aware that the history they have fed themselves is mainly a lie, but they do not know how to be released from it, and they suffer enormously from the resulting personal incoherence. What Baldwin, I think, was saying, and I'm taking a real risk here trying to interpret wisdom as deep as that and a literary genius as extensive as that, but I gather that what James Baldwin was trying to tell white America is that when you have had the luxury of crafting a narrative of yourself and your people and the country you thought was yours, your ability to actually understand how you ended up at the place you find yourself now, in his case in 1965 when he wrote those words, but one could even say now in 2013, becomes very difficult. It becomes difficult, if not impossible, for members of a majority who have crafted a phony narrative, a narrative that at some level we know is not accurate. It becomes very difficult for us to understand not only the other and their perspective on current events or history and our contemporary political moment, but even to understand ourselves. And so rather than try, and rather than perhaps do the work that would allow us to be released from that history about which we're so torn and about which we're so afraid, I suppose, to speak, we try to avoid these conversations. That's why I'm always heartened when people actually show up, because every other voice in the culture is telling you not to. Virtually every voice in the culture is telling you that you don't have to come to events like this, that there isn't even a need for events like this, that events like this where we talk about race are unnecessary, or as one person told me, and I mentioned this earlier to the students I was meeting with, right, that these conversations are so 2007. Because in 2008, I'm sure you heard, a man of color was elected president, and so done, you know, we don't have to have these conversations any longer. They're passé.